As the rain poured down, Emily Carter stepped out of Powell's books, her faded yellow raincoat clinging to her in the chill of late October. Little did she know that behind a dumpster, in a dimly lit alley, a heartbroken man, dressed in an expensive black suit, was struggling with the weight of a shattered engagement. When she found him, his tears were a mirror of her own past pain, and in that moment, she offered a simple hug, an act of kindness that would unknowingly change both their lives forever. But when his true identity as a wealthy tech CEO was revealed, everything would shift. A light drizzle fell steadily on the cobblestone streets of Portland, Oregon, like a thin veil draped across the gray sky. It was late October, and the autumn air carried the characteristic chill of the Pacific Northwest. Emily Carter, 29, stepped out from the back door of Powell's Books, the city's most famous used bookstore, dragging a heavy black trash bag behind her. She wore a faded yellow raincoat with worn sleeves, her damp light brown hair clinging to her cheeks. Her old rubber boots hit the ground, making soft squelching sounds on the wet alley pavement that led behind St. Mary's Church. Her breath puffed out in small white clouds in the cold air. Pausing for a moment, she looked up at the vibrant red maple leaves trembling under the rain, as if they too were trying to hold on to the last traces of warmth before the long winter. It was a rare, peaceful moment in her busy workday, sorting old books, chatting with customers, and sometimes quietly reading a page in a hidden corner of the shop. But then a strange sound broke the stillness, a stifled, broken sob echoing from the deep shadows of the alley. Emily tilted her head, listening. The crying wasn't loud, but it carried a pain she could feel, like an old wound torn open. Setting the trash bag down, she wiped her hands on her faded canvas apron and walked slowly toward the sound. The rain soaked through her coat, making her shiver slightly, but she didn't care. Something about that cry stirred her heart, an instinct she couldn't explain. As she drew closer, the faint glow of a distant street lamp illuminated a figure. A man sat slumped beside a dumpster, his head bowed, shoulders shaking. He wore an expensive black suit, but it was disheveled, soaked, and stained from the ground. His polished leather shoes were caked with mud, and his hand clutched a small glinting object, a gold wedding ring lying abandoned on the pavement like a discarded promise. He didn't look up, only continued to cry, his suppressed sobs as if he were trying to hide his pain from the world, but failing. Emily stood still for a moment, her breath blending with the patter of the rain. She didn't know who he was or what had reduced a man in such an elegant suit to this broken state. But she understood that feeling, the sense of loss and emptiness, as when she stood by the graves of her parents and little brother after the car accident 7 years ago, or when she discovered her fiancé, the man she'd trusted completely, embracing her best friend in the apartment they'd chosen together. 3 years since canceling her engagement, she'd learned to keep going, not by forgetting, but by opening her heart to those who needed her. And right now, this man clearly needed someone. Without another thought, Emily stepped forward and knelt beside him. Her knees touched the cold ground, rainwater seeping through her thin jeans, but she didn't notice. She placed a hand on his shoulder gently, the way she'd once comforted children lost in the bookstore looking for their mothers. He flinched, looking up briefly, his eyes red and blurred with tears and rain, then dropped his head again, as if ashamed to be seen at his weakest. But Emily didn't leave. She pulled him into a hug, not too tight, just enough for him to feel her presence. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the damp earth and rain created a strange fragrance she'd never forget. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered, her voice soft but firm, like a promise. "I'm just here." He didn't reply, but she felt his body gradually relax in her arms. His crying quieted, blending into the steady sound of the rain. They sat like that for a long time, two strangers, nameless yet connected only by shared pain in the dark alley. Emily didn't ask anything. She didn't need to know who he was or what had happened. To her, sometimes a hug was enough to say what words couldn't reach. Finally, when his sobs stopped completely, Emily let go. He still didn't look up, just silently wiped his face with a wet sleeve. She stood, intending to leave, but then her eyes caught the wedding ring lying on the ground. It was tiny, glinting under the streetlight like a shard of a shattered dream. She bent down to pick it up, her cold fingers brushing the cool gold. She didn't know why she did it. Maybe instinct, maybe curiosity. But she quietly slipped the ring into his suit pocket and turned away without another word. As she walked back to the rear door of Powell's, the rain continued its steady rhythm like a wordless, sad song. She glanced back one last time. The man still sat there, motionless, but the ring was now in his pocket, a mystery she wasn't sure she wanted to unravel. She closed the door and returned to the bookstore, where old shelves and the smell of damp paper awaited her. But in her heart, a strange feeling lingered, as if that hug hadn't just been for him, but for her too, a part of herself she'd buried long ago. Emily Carter had always believed in the power of kindness. Her life had been shaped by loss and heartache, and she had learned early on that helping others was the best way to heal her own wounds. Yet, despite her gentle nature, there were moments when the emotional weight of her past threatened to overwhelm her. As she settled back into her routine at Powell's Books, she found herself reflecting on the man she had hugged in the alley just days before. Alexander Reed, a name that had lingered in her mind since their encounter. She had seen the pain in his eyes, felt the depth of his sorrow, and in that moment, she recognized a piece of herself in him. But as the days passed, doubts crept in. Was she merely a temporary refuge for him, a distraction from his reality? The thought made her heart ache. One afternoon, while sorting through a stack of children's books, Emily's best friend Jade approached her, concern etched on her face. Jade, with her short green hair and bold personality, had always been protective of Emily. "You need to be careful with him," Jade cautioned, crossing her arms. "He's a billionaire, and you're just a bookstore girl. What if he's just using you to forget his ex-fiancée?" Emily frowned, shaking her head. "He's not like that, Jade. I can feel it. He's hurting, just like I am. But you don't know him. You don't know what he really wants," Jade replied, her tone sharp. Emily could see the worry in her friend's eyes, but she also felt a flicker of frustration. She didn't want to dismiss Jade's concerns, but she couldn't shake the connection she felt with Alexander. As the rain continued to fall outside, Emily's thoughts drifted back to their shared moment in the alley. The warmth of that embrace had lingered in her mind, a light in the midst of her own darkness. Yet the memory was bittersweet, tinged with uncertainty. She found herself questioning whether she was enough to help him heal, or if she was simply setting herself up for more heartache. One evening, after a long day at work, Emily sat in her small apartment, surrounded by the books she loved, but feeling a sense of emptiness. She picked up a copy of The Alchemist, the same book she had handed to Alexander during their brief encounter. Flipping through the pages, she read her favorite lines again. "When you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it." The words had once brought her comfort, but now they felt like a cruel reminder of what she had lost and what she feared she could never have. Days turned into weeks, and Alexander continued to visit Powell's, each time lingering a little longer. They shared brief conversations about literature, life, and the small joys that came with books. Yet, the deeper connection she craved remained just out of reach. Emily was torn between her desire to open her heart and the fear of being hurt again. Then, one rainy afternoon, as the gray clouds hovered above Portland, Alexander walked into the bookstore, looking more somber than usual. He approached her quietly, his eyes filled with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low. Emily nodded, her heart racing as she led him to a quiet corner of the store, away from prying eyes. As they stood there, the rain pattering softly against the windows, Emily felt a mix of anticipation and dread. She wanted to know more about it, to understand the man behind the headlines and the pain. But as he began to speak, she could see the hesitation in his eyes, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on him. "I've been thinking a lot about that night," he started, his gaze steady on hers. "About how you just held me. I didn't expect that kind of kindness from a stranger." Emily felt her heart swell at his acknowledgement, but she also sensed the walls he had built around himself. "Sometimes we all need someone to lean on," she replied softly. But you don't have to carry everything alone. He looked down, his expression shifting as he contemplated her words. I'm not sure how to let people in, he admitted, a hint of vulnerability breaking through his guarded exterior. I've spent so long pushing everyone away, and now I don't know how to change that. In that moment, Emily realized that they were both navigating their own fears and insecurities. They were two broken souls trying to find their way, yet neither of them could take the first step toward healing. She wanted to reach out, to pull him closer, but the fear of being hurt again held her back. As they stood in silence, the rain continued to fall, mirroring the uncertainty that hung in the air. Emily knew that their connection had the potential to grow deeper, but only if they could both confront their pasts and embrace the possibility of a future together. In the days following their first encounter at Powell's Books, Alexander Reed found himself returning more frequently, almost as if he was drawn to the place by an invisible thread. At first, he came with simple excuses, looking for books that Emily had mentioned during their brief embrace. Titles like The Alchemist and other classics about the search for life's meaning. But as time went on, he lingered longer, not just to browse, but to talk. Their conversations often began awkwardly, with both of them hesitant to delve too deeply into their lives. Emily enjoyed the quiet moments spent side by side, him flipping through pages while she sorted old books or jotted down notes in her small notebook. Powell's Books, with its towering shelves and the comforting scent of damp paper, became their unplanned meeting place, a refuge where two people who had once touched each other's pain could find solace. Emily kept her distance, never pressing him to share more than brief replies about books or the weather in Portland. She recommended healing books she loved, always starting with The Alchemist, and followed by Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning or The Night Circus with its gentle magic. But she never probed why he kept coming back. She could only guess parts of it, sensing that he was searching for something deeper. One rainy afternoon, as the wind howled outside, Alexander stood at the counter, a worn copy of The Alchemist in his hands. He flipped to the first page and asked, "Do you really believe the universe helps us find what we want?" Emily smiled, her heart warming at the question. "I believe sometimes we have to help ourselves first, and then the universe follows." He nodded slightly, his gaze lingering on her longer than usual, as if weighing her words. Not everyone was as at ease with Alexander's presence as Emily was. Jade, her best friend and co-worker, eyed him suspiciously every time he walked through the door. Petite and outspoken, Jade was the type to speak her mind, sometimes to the point of discomfort. "You know he's a billionaire, right?" she said one afternoon after Alexander had left. "He's the guy everyone in Portland's talking about for getting left at the altar. You think he's for real or just taking advantage of your kindness?" Emily frowned, setting her pen down. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're too nice, and who knows? Billionaires don't just wander into the used bookstores looking for soulmates. I got conned once by a guy claiming he was an artist. Turned out he just wanted rent money." "I don't want you hurt again," Jade replied, her concern evident. Emily sighed, knowing Jade meant well. She valued their friendship and appreciated Jade's protective nature, but she shook her head. "He's not that kind of person. I don't know what he wants, but I'm not giving anything except book suggestions." Jade huffed, but agreed to drop the topic, leaving Emily alone with her thoughts. As the rain continued to pour outside, Emily couldn't shake off the nagging doubts that lingered in her mind. She felt a connection with Alexander, but was it real? Could she truly trust him after everything she had been through? The emotional scars from her past still felt raw and fresh. Yet, every time he walked into Powell's, her heart raced with a mix of excitement and fear. One stormy evening, as the wind rattled the windows of the bookstore, Alexander arrived later than usual, his dark gray wool coat soaked through. Emily was tidying the counter when he walked in, carrying the scent of rain and a hint of loneliness. "I thought you wouldn't come in this weather," she said, half joking and half serious. "I didn't have anywhere else to go," he replied, his voice low, almost a whisper. For the first time, Emily sensed a crack in his icy shell. To break the silence, Alexander approached the ancient coffee machine in the corner, a relic from the 80s that the Powell staff kept, despite its frequent breakdowns. "Want some coffee?" he asked, holding the stained glass pot. Emily nodded, curious to see him wrestle with the machine. He fumbled with the buttons, spilling hot water across the counter as he tried to fix it. A black stain spread over the wood, and Emily couldn't help but laugh at his clumsiness. "I'm not that bad, am I?" he said, looking up in surprise, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "No, you just look like a kid doing chores for the first time," Emily teased, her laughter ringing through the stillness. In that moment, under Powell's warm golden light, he looked at her as if seeing sunlight after a long winter, and she felt her heart lighten. That night, after finally managing to get the coffee machine to work, they sat across from each other, steaming mugs in hand. It was then that Alexander opened up unexpectedly. "She left because she couldn't handle the pressure," he said, his eyes on his cup. "The media, living with someone like me, cold, distant. I don't blame her, but I don't know how to be different." Emily listened intently, her heart tightening around her mug. "I used to think I wasn't good enough either. My ex-fiancé cheated on me with my best friend right before our wedding. I wondered what I did wrong, but then I realized it wasn't my fault. I got through it by helping others because then I stopped thinking about my own pain." For the first time, their eyes met with understanding. They were not just strangers in a bookstore. They were two broken people trying to piece themselves back together. As Alexander left that night, the rain still fell steadily outside, and Emily stood behind the counter, watching his figure fade through the glass. She didn't know what was starting between them, but she felt a shift. Nothing grand or clear, just a small spark like Powell's light on old book pages, enough to make her look forward to the next time. As the weeks passed, the awkward encounters between Emily and Alexander at Powell's Books became an essential part of their lives, though neither of them openly acknowledged it. One crisp November afternoon, with Portland still clinging to the chill of autumn, Alexander walked into the bookstore with an unusual determination. He held a small ticket stamped with the Portland Book Festival logo, the city's biggest book event where authors, publishers, and thousands of book lovers gathered each year. Setting the ticket on the counter where Emily was labeling a stack of old books, he said in a low, steady voice, "Come with me next week." Emily looked up, her light brown eyes flashing with surprise. "I'm not good with crowds, you know that," she replied, shaking her head with a faint smile. "It sounds suffocating just thinking about it." Alexander tilted his head, undeterred. "I don't like crowds either, but I thought you'd enjoy the used book stalls there. They even have a section for kids' books, like the ones you send out." He studied her face, noticing the spark of interest in her eyes. Emily hesitated, weighing her options. She had grown fond of their time together, but the thought of navigating a festival filled with strangers made her anxious. "I'll think about it, but don't get your hopes up," she finally said, trying to maintain her boundaries. Yet, Alexander didn't give up easily. Over the next week, he stopped by Powell's almost daily, each time with a new reason to sway her. He mentioned an author she loved who would be signing books, talked about a rare book stall with imports from Europe, and even asked, "Aren't you even a little curious?" Emily began to find his persistence amusing, but it also softened her resolve. Finally, on a Saturday morning, when he showed up with a flyer not for the book festival, but for a book donation event at a small suburban library, she sighed and set her pen down on the counter. "Fine, but just this." "No festival, no crowds," she agreed, a smile breaking across her face. Alexander grinned, a rare smile lighting up his face. "I knew you'd say yes." That day, the sky unexpectedly cleared, allowing sunshine to filter through the vibrant red maple leaves lining the roads to the suburbs. Emily sat beside Alexander in his sleek black SUV, feeling a touch out of place as they left the familiarity of Powell's for something new. They arrived at the small town about 40 minutes from the city, where volunteers were setting up a book donation booth outside the community library. The atmosphere was lively but not overwhelming, with wooden tables piled high with children's books and the scent of coffee wafting from a tiny indie cafe across the street. Emily instantly felt more at ease. She stepped out of the car, cradling a box of old books from Powell's that she had picked out beforehand. Titles like The Very Hungry Caterpillar and Charlotte's Web, stories she believed would bring joy to the kids. Alexander, though unaccustomed to events like this, didn't stand on the sidelines. He quietly helped her arrange the books on the table, his hands, so often at home on a keyboard, fumbling as he stacked them, occasionally dropping a few for her to pick up. "You don't have to do this," she said, but he shrugged, a slight smile on his lips. "I didn't come here to watch," he replied, his determination evident as he worked alongside her. They toiled in silence for a while until a group of kids, 5 or 6 of them dressed in colorful fall jackets, ran over, peering curiously at the books. A curly-haired girl about 6 pointed at where the wild things are and asked, "Can you read it to us, mister?" Alexander froze, glancing at Emily for help. She grinned mischievously, pressing the book into his hands. "Go on, it's not hard." He took the book, sat on a small wooden chair among the kids, and started reading in his deep voice, though he clearly had no idea how to play the storyteller. "The night Max wore his wolf suit and made mischief of one kind." He paused, attempting a monster growl that sounded more like a cough, sending the kids into fits of giggles. Emily stood by the nearby coffee table, holding a paper cup of hot latte, unable to hold back her laughter. It rang through the peaceful space, and even Alexander couldn't stay serious, the corner of his mouth lifting as he saw her delight. The kids clapped and shouted, "Keep going, Monster Man!" He obliged, adding a bit more expression this time, though still clumsy enough to knock over a water cup nearby. As the donation event wrapped up by late afternoon, the sun dipped behind distant hills, painting Oregon's sky a brilliant orange. On the drive back, a quiet moment settled in the car until Alexander suddenly broke the silence. "I've never done anything like today," he said, his voice thoughtful. "I mean for other people, with no gain." Emily turned to him, surprised. "So why did you?" He kept his eyes on the road, his voice low but firm. "Because you make it look easy, like helping others is the most natural thing in the world." Her heart swelled at his words, warmth spreading through her like the rare sunshine they had enjoyed that day. A few weeks later, Alexander surprised her again. One morning he arrived at Powell's not with a book or a question, but with a bigger idea. Inspired by the donation event, he had funded a mobile library, a small truck filled with books to travel to remote Oregon areas where kids rarely got new reading material. "It'll start running next month," he said, his hands in his coat pockets, trying to downplay his pride. Emily's eyes lit up with excitement. "Really? You're not kidding?" He nodded, then pulled a small wooden box from his pocket and slid it toward her. She opened it, revealing an antique book press, polished walnut with intricate carvings, something she had once dreamed of using to restore her beloved old books at the shop. Her hands trembled as she touched it, her eyes welling up. "Alexander, I don't know what to say." He shrugged, his voice softer than usual. "You don't have to say anything. I just thought it belonged with..." When he left, Emily stood quietly by the counter, still holding the book press, gazing out through Powell's large glass window. The rare Portland sunlight streamed in, illuminating the weathered shelves, and she felt a new beginning, not just for him, but for her too. Alexander was no longer the broken man from the alley, and she was no longer just someone who healed others. Together they were creating something warm, even if it was only the start. Winter arrived in Portland earlier than usual, bringing biting winds that swept through the cobblestone streets and rattled the large glass windows of Powell's books. Emily stood behind the counter sorting a stack of newly arrived books, her heart lighter than ever after the warm days spent with Alexander. Their relationship had no label and no promises, but she felt a growing connection, a bond that was genuine, like two imperfect puzzle pieces fitting together. Alexander continued to visit Powell's regularly, sometimes bringing coffee from Stumptown, sometimes just standing quietly by the shelves and asking about the old books she loved. Emily began to think that perhaps after all her losses, she was finally finding a place to belong. Yet on a late November afternoon, with the sky gray and a steady drizzle pattering on Powell's roof, The shop's door jingled, and a woman stepped inside.
She was tall, with glossy blonde hair tied high, wearing an expensive cream fur coat and high heels that clicked rhythmically on the wooden floor. Emily looked up, mildly surprised but unconcerned, until the woman marched straight to the secluded corner where Alexander stood holding a copy of Dune, which he intended to buy.
"Alex," her voice rang out, soft yet sharp. "I need to talk to you." Emily froze, her hand still on a book, as realization hit her. This was Sophia, Alexander's ex-fiancée, the one who had left him at the altar, the one all of Portland had buzzed about. Alexander set the book down, his face hardening, deep blue eyes flashing with irritation. "Sophia," he said, his voice icy. "What do you want?" Sophia stepped closer, her hands clasped as if steadying herself. "I'm sorry, Alex. I know I was wrong to leave. The pressure, the media, work, everything, I couldn't handle it. But I've thought it over. I want to come back to fix things." Her voice trembled, and her eyes glistened as if on the verge of tears. But Alexander shook his head, cutting her off. "No, Sophia. I don't want to hear it. You chose to leave, and I've accepted that. There's nothing left between us." Sophia stood still, her lips pressed tight, then turned away, but not before whispering, "You'll regret this." Emily hadn't meant to eavesdrop. She was in the back stockroom, a few meters away, holding a box of old books she had planned to show. She unintentionally witnessed it all, the way Sophia touched his shoulder, the flicker of hesitation in his eyes for a split second before he refused. Her chest tightened, not from jealousy, but from an old fear resurfacing, the fear that she wasn't enough, that she was just a stand-in, a temporary balm for a broken heart. Leaning against the shelves, her trembling hand brushed against the copy of The Alchemist she always kept close, like a talisman. The book's words echoed in her mind. When you want something, all the universe conspires to help you. But in that moment, she wondered if the universe truly wanted her here, or if she was just fooling herself. For the rest of the day, Emily couldn't focus. She dropped the book, mixed up a customer's coffee order, and when Alexander approached the counter to ask if she was okay, she forced a smile. "I'm fine, just a little tired." He didn't push, but his eyes, once bright when he read to the kids, now felt stifling. As thoughts raced through her mind, she began to rethink everything. His visits to Powell's, the stories he shared, the book press he'd given her. Was he just using her to forget Sophia? Was she merely a placeholder, a kind soul he leaned on when no one else was there? The thought lodged in her mind like a small knife, piercing old scars. The car accident that took her family, Ethan's betrayal, and she told herself, "I can't let it happen again." That night in her small East Portland apartment, Emily stood before her personal bookshelf, running her fingers over The Alchemist, her eyes blurring with tears. She recalled his words about Sophia, how she couldn't handle his coldness, and wondered if he had truly rejected her or if it was just a moment of hesitation he would later reconsider. Flipping open the book, she reread her favorite line. "When you want something," but this time it didn't comfort her. She snapped it shut, sat at her table, and wrote a resignation letter to Powell's manager. She couldn't stay. She couldn't keep being someone's temporary fix, even if that someone was Alexander. She decided to leave, not just Powell's, but Portland, for Seattle, where a nonprofit educational organization had offered her a job months earlier. It was a chance to start over, to focus on helping others without risking her heart again. Jade was the first to know, and she wasn't happy. The next morning, when Emily arrived at Powell's to submit her letter, Jade dragged her to the counter's corner, her voice short. "What are you doing? Quitting? Moving just because that billionaire talked of his old flame?" Emily sighed, trying to explain. "It's not about him, Jade. It's about me. I don't want to get caught in that cycle again. Trusting someone, then finding out I'm not enough." Jade crossed her arms, eyes piercing. "You're always helping others, always healing. Why not yourself? Running away like this, you're letting him win or letting the past win?" Emily shook her head, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm not giving up. I just need time to figure out what I want." Jade huffed, turning away, but not before muttering, "I'll miss you, but I hate how you're running like this." Before leaving Portland, Emily did one last thing.
Late that evening, after Powell's had closed, she used her staff key to slip inside. She walked to the secluded corner where Alexander often stood, placing The Alchemist on the small table he used for reading, along with a handwritten note, "Find your treasure." She wrote nothing more, offered no explanation, and quietly left, taking the book press he'd given her and a small suitcase of clothes. The next day, she boarded a Greyhound bus to Seattle, staring out the window as Portland faded behind the hills, her heart empty yet relieved. She didn't know if she was right or wrong, but she knew she needed distance. From Alexander, from Powell's, from the hope she'd begun to build. A few days after Emily left, Alexander Reed walked into Powell's books, as he did almost every weekend, but something felt different. The bell above the door jingled, but the familiar warmth he had come to associate with the bookstore was absent. He sensed it immediately. Emily was gone. The counter was empty, and her gentle smile was nowhere to be found. Jade stood behind the counter instead, her expression unreadable. Alexander approached her, a coffee from Stumptown in hand, and asked, "Where's Emily?" Jade's gaze hardened, and without a word, she slid a familiar book toward him. "She left this for you," she said, her voice flat. He picked up The Alchemist, his fingers tracing the cover as a wave of confusion washed over it. "Gone where?" he pressed, his voice edging on pen. "Seattle," Jade replied, crossing her arms. "A few days ago." She didn't say much, but I guess it's because of you and that blonde ex of yours. Alexander stood frozen, the book heavy in his hands. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Emily had left, and he hadn't even realized how much he needed her until she was gone. It wasn't just loss he felt, it was love, something he hadn't recognized until now. He looked at Jade, urgency in his voice. "What do you mean she left because of me? She must have misunderstood. I don't want her to go." Jade shrugged, a mix of anger and pity in her eyes. "You should have been clearer. You let her see you with Sophia, and now she thinks she was just a rebound." The name Sophia echoed in his mind, a reminder of his past mistakes. He hadn't meant for Emily to feel like a placeholder. She was so much more than that. He had spent years building walls around his heart, but Emily had managed to break through them in a way he never thought possible. Determined, Alexander left Powell's, the book tucked into his coat pocket as he began to scour Portland for her. He drove to the Multnomah County Library, where Emily had once mentioned loving to read on her days off, but found only silence and rows of books. He stopped by Voodoo Donut, where she had once brought a box of pink frosted donuts for the kids at the donation event, asking the staff if they had seen a light brown-haired girl in a yellow raincoat, but they shook their heads, busy with an endless line of customers. Days passed, and Alexander returned to Powell's, hoping Jade might relent and give him more clues. But she just stared at him, the pity in her eyes growing. "She doesn't want you to find her. Let her be." But he couldn't, not with The Alchemist weighing in his hands like a reminder of everything he had lost. Every street corner, every cafe stirred memories of Emily, her laughter, her kindness, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about books. One drizzly morning, as he walked through the Pearl District, he caught a glimpse of a brown-haired girl in a faded yellow raincoat stepping out of a small flower shop. His heart raced. "Emily!" he shouted across the street, his voice echoing over the hum of traffic and pattering rain. The girl turned, but it wasn't Emily. Just a stranger with startled eyes looking at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Sorry, my mistake," he mumbled, turning away, his face hot with embarrassment, though a foolish spark of hope had flared that she might still be nearby. He stood in the rain for a moment, clutching the book in his pocket. After a week of fruitless searching in Portland, Alexander widened his hunt. He recalled a passing conversation when Emily mentioned a nonprofit educational organization in Seattle that had offered her a job. It was his only lead, and he didn't hesitate. He drove up I-5, the 170-plus-mile stretch from Portland to Seattle, carrying her book like a talisman, his heart heavy but unable to stop. Seattle greeted him with a gray sky, no different from Portland's, but the pace here was faster and louder, with towering buildings and bustling crowds. He didn't know where to start,
only driving through neighborhoods, checking public libraries and used bookstores, and even asking around Pike Place Market if anyone had seen her. But no one knew an Emily Carter, and he began to feel like a fool, chasing a shadow she didn't want him to catch. Then, on a weekend afternoon, just as he was about to give up, he spotted a flyer taped to a lamppost near Capitol Hill. It advertised an event by the nonprofit educational group that read Storytime for Immigrant Children, bringing knowledge to the community. Instinct told him to go. He drove to the location, a small, warm community center with pale yellow walls and the sound of children's chatter spilling out. As he stepped inside, the alchemist still in hand, he heard a familiar voice, gentle yet clear, reading aloud. And then the boy realized, sometimes the most magical things aren't in books, but in the people you meet. He froze in the doorway, his heart skipping a beat. It was Emily, sitting among a group of immigrant kids, holding the boy who fell off the Mayflower, her eyes alight as she told the story. The kids clapped as she finished, and she stood, telling them in a warm voice, books don't fix people, people fix each other. Alexander's throat tightened, the book in his hand trembling as he realized what he had denied all this time. He loved her, not because she had saved him in that alley, but because she was the only one who made him want to be a better version of himself. He stepped forward but didn't dare speak, just stood silently in the room, watching her from afar, afraid that if he got closer, she'd vanish again. When Emily turned and their eyes met, she stopped, her hands tightening around the book. Surprise, confusion, and a hint of pain flashed across her face. She said nothing, just stared, and he didn't know how to begin. But the alchemist in his hand, the one she left with, felt like an answer now. He had found his treasure, not in his company or the things he once thought mattered, but in her, the one who had left and forced him to search.